The room wasn't built for conflict, but conflict had walked in. It was supposed to be a soft event, the Global Youth Leadership Dialogue, a panel featuring diplomats, youth ambassadors, and rising voices. Cameras flashed, polite applause echoed, and in the center sat Barron Trump, tall, poised, and speaking with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Next to him sat Traoré, quiet, composed, unmoved. Barron leaned back in his chair and smirked slightly as the moderator asked a question about international leadership. "Well," Barron said, "we can talk ideals all day, but let's be real, some people in this room are way out of their league. We've built systems, won wars, carried economies. Others are, just catching up." A few chuckles from the front row. Nervous ones. Barron glanced sideways at Traoré and added, "No offense." It was offense. Traoré looked up, slowly. The kind of look that doesn't rise to anger, because it doesn't have to. He didn't speak. Not yet. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. "Would you like to respond, President Traoré?" Traoré leaned forward, folded his hands, and spoke with the precision of a man who didn't come to spar, but to settle. "Barron," he said calmly, "you were born with power. I was born under its shadow. You inherited a seat. I fought for mine." The room fell quiet. "And when you say I'm out of my league," Traoré continued, "you confuse comfort with competence. I didn't come here to impress you. I came here so young leaders don't mistake arrogance for authority." Barron blinked. The smirk faded slightly. Traoré turned to the audience now. "You want to talk about league? Then let's talk legacy. Because history won't remember who was tall or who was rich. It'll remember who stood when others stayed seated." He sat back. No applause. Just a silence that felt like judgment. Barron had thrown the first jab. But it was Traoré who landed the first blow. Barron adjusted his cufflink, trying to reassert control. The smirk returned, but this time it felt forced. "You've got strong words, Mr. Traoré," he said. "But strong words don't make strong nations. You talk about legacy, but America built the world order you walk through. You're standing in a system we created." A few polite nods from the front. He was playing to the room again. Traoré didn't move. He waited a beat. Then two. Then he spoke. "You built a world order, yes. One that ranked people by what they owned, not what they earned. A system that loaned money with one hand, and took land with the other." The moderator raised a hand, but Traoré continued. "I know your version of legacy. The kind written in ink but enforced by silence. You think the world works because you inherited it. But what you really inherited was the illusion of control." That line hit. Barron leaned forward. "So what, you think you're above it?" "No," Traoré said. "I think I'm finally outside of it." The air shifted. Some attendees sat straighter. Phones were now filming, not just taking notes. "You say strong words don't build strong nations," Traoré said. "But your nation was built on declarations. We the people. Life, liberty. All men are created equal. Those were words." He leaned in just slightly. "So if my words frighten you, it's because you recognize the power they carry." Barron glanced at the moderator, as if silently asking for backup. None came. Traoré looked at him once more. "You're used to speaking last. But not today." Then he sat back. Still. Steady. The room didn't clap. It didn't move. Because Barron thought this was about status. But Traoré had made it about substance. And suddenly, the league Barron was so proud of, felt small. Barron leaned forward now, dropping the polished tone for something sharper. "You love to criticize the system, but let's be honest, if that system didn't exist, you wouldn't be sitting here. You're only visible because we gave you the spotlight. It was bold. And it was dangerous. Traoré didn't react with anger. He reacted with clarity. He stood, not quickly, not with force. Just enough to command the moment. You think you gave me the spotlight, he said. But the only reason you're seeing me now is because you spent decades ignoring us. The room hushed again. A few heads nodded, quietly, cautiously. You built the stage, Traoré continued, but we brought the truth. You controlled the camera, but you never controlled the story. Barron opened his mouth to cut in, but Traoré didn't stop. You say I owe my presence to your system. But your system wasn't built for me, it was built to contain me. And the fact that I'm here doesn't prove your generosity. It proves your grip is slipping. Even the moderator didn't interrupt this time. Traoré walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, not for drama, but for effect. You call this a league, he said. But what is a league if it only lets certain voices speak without interruption? What is greatness if it's fragile in the face of difference? He looked back at Barron, eyes steady. You're not afraid I'm out of my league. You're afraid I'm no longer playing by yours. That line echoed. No retort. No laughter. Just truth, heavy and unshakable. Barron looked away, briefly. Traoré didn't gloat. He returned to his seat, calm and composed. Because this wasn't about winning a debate. It was about taking back the narrative. And in that room, he already had. Barron straightened in his chair, eyebrows raised. You talk like you've been fighting dragons. But most of us in this room have read your headlines, not your accomplishments. Your name sounds loud, but what have you really built? A few murmurs. A deliberate jab. It wasn't a question, it was a dismissal wrapped in a smirk. Traoré didn't blink. He stood once more, slow, steady. What have I built? He repeated. Villages that were never mapped. Schools and places the UN couldn't pronounce. Power in towns where the only light came from candles we couldn't afford. He didn't raise his voice. My name isn't loud. Your ignorance is. That silenced the whispers. You read headlines, Traoré said. I bury victims of those headlines. When your world talks about security, we are already counting the bodies. The moderator shifted, but didn't interrupt. You mock what you don't understand, Traoré continued. But I didn't come from theory. I came from survival. And I don't wear suits to prove I belong. I wear scars. He paused. And if that intimidates you, it's not because I'm out of my league. It's because I survived one. Now even the skeptical faces in the crowd held still. Barron leaned forward, looking to recover. But Traoré didn't give him the time. He turned to the room again. You want legacy? Build something that can't be inherited. You want power? Earn it where no cameras exist. You want truth? He pointed, not at Barron, but at the audience. Then stop applauding the loudest voice and start listening to the one that never had a mic until now. Silence again. Not because the room disagreed, but because it finally understood it had been talked down to for too long. And now? It was Traoré's voice that built something. Not headlines. But history. Barron leaned forward again, this time slower, choosing his words with extra care. Mr. Traoré, I respect your passion. But leadership isn't about emotion. It's about vision. Discipline. Strategy. Your speeches sound strong, but where's the real plan? He folded his hands like a statesman. It was the oldest trick in the book, wrap arrogance in civility and call it leadership. Traoré smiled. Just faintly. Then he stood. Again. But this time, he didn't look at Barron. He looked at the room. Leadership? He asked. Let me tell you what it isn't. He stepped to the center of the stage. Leadership isn't talking down. It isn't winning by inheritance. It isn't silence in the face of injustice because speaking might cost you something. He turned now, locking eyes with Barron. Leadership is being the last voice in a room that tried to erase you. It's feeding people before you fund weapons. It's refusing to beg for access to tables you never helped build. Barron's jaw tensed. Traoré didn't stop. You say vision matters? I've seen more vision in a farmer trying to keep his land than in a boardroom full of billionaires. I've seen more discipline in a child walking 5 miles to school than in a nation spending trillions on surveillance. Now, even the moderator was watching, speechless. And strategy? Traoré finished. Real strategy is knowing when to listen. You haven't learned that yet. That line broke something in the air. Barron said nothing. Because what can strategy say to live truth? The room wasn't leaning toward Traoré anymore. It had already crossed over. Trying to regain ground, Barron leaned in again. This time, his voice softened. Look, I'm not here to disrespect anyone. But let's have some perspective. My country has led the world in science, innovation, security. We've earned respect. He looked out into the audience, almost expecting nods. Some obliged. It was familiar rhetoric. It sounded like home. Traoré didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, powerfully, he stood again. I'm not here to take your respect, he said. I'm here to ask why you think you own it. He stepped forward slowly. You say your country leads in science. But who mined the cobalt? Who dug the uranium? Who bled in silence while your screens lit up and your rockets rose? Barron blinked. You say you lead in security, Traoré continued. But who paid for that security with shattered cities? Whose skies were violated in the name of someone else's order? Now the room was still again. Frozen not by conflict, but by confrontation. You want respect? Traoré said. Then stop confusing legacy with leadership. Barron tried to cut in, but Traoré held the floor with nothing but tone. You think respect is something you inherited. I think it's something you forgot how to earn. He paused. We remember everything, he said. Because we didn't have the privilege to forget. Barron leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. Traoré didn't wait for permission to finish. You want respect, he said, but what you need is memory. And until you learn to carry yours, we'll carry ours. In silence. In scars. In strength. For the first time, even the staff behind the stage looked up from their notes. Because it was no longer about the two men at the table. It was about what had been spoken, and what could no longer be unheard. Barron straightened up, trying now to frame himself as the rational voice. I understand the pain behind your words, Mr. Traoré, he said, tone more diplomatic, but we have to move forward. Fixating on the past doesn't build the future. The audience gave a few tentative nods. It was the classic pivot, let the past be the past. Start fresh. Reset the scoreboard. But Traoré didn't move. He just stared at Barron. Not with anger. With something deeper. Recognition. Then he spoke. You think remembering is fixation. But for us, it's survival. He stood again. You get to move forward because your foundations are still standing. You get to speak of the future because the past rewarded you. Now he turned to the audience. We don't bring up history because we're stuck in it. We bring it up because we live in its consequences. Still. Every day. Barron crossed his arms. You want to move on? Traoré said, still calm. Then carry what we've carried. Build with nothing. Negotiate with nations that expect your silence. Bury your leaders and be told it was for your own good. Then, maybe, you'll understand what forward really means. There was no performance in his voice. Only presence. And let me be clear, he added. I'm not here to rewrite history. I'm here to stop it from repeating. Now, even those who arrived skeptical were quiet. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. Barron looked around, his eyes scanning for support. But support had shifted. Because while he tried to control the optics, Traoré had seized the story. And now, no one remembered who spoke first. Only who spoke truth. Barron exhaled slowly, forcing a light chuckle. You take things awfully seriously, Mr. Traoré. Sometimes a room needs less history and more humor. It was meant to break the tension. A classic fallback, diffuse with a joke, reposition the mood, act unbothered. But Traoré didn't smile. And neither did the room. He stood again, this time slower. The movement itself carried authority. I'm glad you can joke, he said. That means the stakes were never life or death for you. Barron shifted in his seat. You can afford to laugh, Traoré continued, because your inheritance came with insulation. You call it legacy. I call it a cushion between your words and their consequences. The moderator adjusted his tie. No one spoke. You want humor? Traoré said, his voice level. Then ask the farmers whose lands were taken in trade deals they never signed. Ask the mothers who buried their sons after peacekeeping missions went wrong. Ask them what's funny. Barron looked down briefly, then tried to recover. I didn't mean it that way. But you said it that way, Traoré replied instantly. And that's the difference between us. I weigh my words. You throw yours. He paused, letting the silence settle again, heavy, earned. You're used to being heard without being understood. I'm used to being understood, without ever being truly heard. And now, the crowd truly was listening. Because this wasn't about one room anymore. It was about every room Traoré had ever walked into where he wasn't supposed to speak, where he was expected to smile, where silence was survival. But not today. Today, the weight stayed. Because Traoré carried it for all of them. Barron sat back now, arms crossed, lips tight. Whatever confidence had filled him at the start of the panel was no longer present. The cameras still pointed at him, but so did the silence. He'd tried dismissal. He'd tried humor. He'd even tried diplomacy. None of it worked. And it wasn't just Traoré's voice that silenced him. It was the echo behind it. Traoré remained standing, not by accident, but by intention. The audience had stopped looking for the moderator. They didn't need guidance anymore. They had found the weight of real leadership in a man who never raised his voice, but never lowered his standard either. You wanted to test me, Traoré said, now speaking not just to Barron, but through him. You thought you'd corner me with youth, with confidence, with the assumption that this world still revolves around inherited names and titles. He stepped forward slowly. But I didn't come here to defend myself. I came here to disrupt a room that forgot how fragile its throne really is. Barron said nothing. He couldn't. Traoré turned to the crowd. You watched him try to measure me with his scale. Status. Comfort. Applause. But I'm not here to fit inside that frame. I'm here to break it. Now the stillness in the room wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Because something had happened that few expected. The son of legacy had run out of legacy. And the man once called a sideshow had become the center. Traoré looked back at Barron one last time. You told me I was out of my league, he said. He let that hang. Then. I think you meant out of your control. The panel ended, but no one reached for their coats. No polite applause. No networking chatter. Just a heavy silence, as if something larger than words had been spoken, something no one could unhear. Barron Trump remained seated, stiff and expressionless. For the first time in his carefully curated public life, he had no script left. His usual tools, confidence, charm, the quiet backing of a powerful name, had all been dismantled without force. Not by volume. By presence. Traoré shook a few hands, nodded respectfully to the moderator, then walked toward the exit, not flanked by bodyguards, not searching for cameras. Just walking. Upright. Finished. A reporter followed, mic in hand. "President Traoré, how would you describe what just happened in there?" He paused in the hallway, thoughtful. "I'd call it recalibration." The reporter blinked. "Of what?" "Of respect," Traoré said. "And of who gets to define it." Then he kept walking. Back inside, Barron sat alone at the table. His aides avoided eye contact. There was no one left to laugh, to validate, to applaud. He had entered that room expecting a sparring match. But what he got was a reminder. That experience doesn't come from age. That authority isn't always inherited. And that sometimes, you're not watching a man rise. You're watching a world shift. He thought he could size Traoré up with a smirk. He thought legacy meant leverage. He thought status could silence experience. But Barron Trump learned something in that room. Power you inherit can vanish. But power you earn, speaks without permission. Traoré didn't insult. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He stood when others tried to shrink him. He answered condescension with conviction. And when he walked out, he didn't just win the room. He rewrote who it belonged to. So next time someone says, "You're out of your league," remember Traoré. And remember who walked away with the last word.